Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at Real War Stories number 1 and number 2. First one, 1987, second one, 1991. These were published by Eclipse Comics in association with the Central Committee for Conscientious Objectors. So these are basically like educational comics, giving young people alternate paths they can take, especially in the time when we used to have a draft. And basically, they're recounting stories from veterans, telling their stories about being lied to by the military, about being put in harm's way, about having their civil rights, trod all over. So what makes this amazing, though, is the lineup that they got to be in it. As we shall see, it's some of the biggest names in comics even now. But back in 1987, 1991, this is some hot shit gets they had. And let's take a look at the first one. We have a cover by Bill Sienkiewicz. This is right around the time he's doing Electra Assassin, starting to do his painterly work. This is based on a children's drawing from Honduras, and it kind of gives you an idea of the kind of living hell that was going on there. This is what children were drawing in class. This was their day-to-day experience. Soldiers killing adults and chopping their heads off and being shot at from planes and helicopters. Behind it, though, it's almost hard to see. You can see these beautifully painted faces, sad, horrified faces. Prime Sienkiewicz work. We have a little anecdotes from all of the contributors, not necessarily telling you what they've done in the past, just kind of giving their own kind of reason why they wanted to draw a comic for this book and volunteer their time. First story, The Elite of the Fleet. And this is the story of Tim Merrill, is a Navy veteran, as told to Mike W. Barr, writer, and Brian Bolland and Mark Farmer, artists. So, nice way to start off an issue. Brian Bolland art. At this point, Brian Bolland was already pretty much cutting back on his interior work, just doing lots of covers, doing the random project here and there. But so this is kind of nice to get some, quality Brian Bolland pages. This guy's recounting his story to the CCCO, I believe, or maybe it's just to Mike W. Barr, talking about how when he joined the Navy, he was promised all this training. And of course, as soon as he gets in, they're like, nah, you're just going to have a grunt job. I guess they do that a lot. They bait and switch people, promise them, you'll have all this expensive training in electronics, which you'll be able to use when you become a civilian. But apparently that's not the case a lot of the time. They talk about, in the submarines where guys are out at sea for months at a time, there's lots of cases of rape. It's kind of like being in prison, just a bunch of guys stuck in a submarine. So this guy basically had enough and became a conscientious objector. And he got out of the Navy. Man, I love looking at Brian Bolland. So this is Tapestries, Part 1. Story by W.D. Earhart and Alan Moore. Art by Stan Walk and John Toddleman. So this is basically Alan Moore kind of crafted this story, adapted it from the writings of W.D. Earhart, a veteran of Vietnam. It's kind of told in a binary form, with little panels of W.D. Earhart growing up and, growing up in America and being all patriotic, feeling patriotic about his country, and then his experience in Vietnam and how that kind of crushed his youthful optimism. So on the right side here, we're showing all the horrible things he had to do in Vietnam. Well, some of them he didn't have to do. He just did. his humanity was kind of just dripping away, melting away, and he found himself doing some pretty bad stuff. This is interesting. Tapestries Part 2 is almost like a remix of this first story. This one just says script by Alan Moore. So I think Alan Moore just took W.D. Hart's writings and went off into a more, just try to make it fiction. The art's by Stephen Bissette, though, so it's nice. And once again, this is a binary form. This time, it's showing his experience when he gets home from Vietnam, how a lot of people shun him. A lot of his friends and girlfriends don't want anything to do with him anymore because, you know, there was that whole thing like baby killers. A lot of Vietnam vets came home to a not very welcoming reception. And then also this side now is once again remembering the horrible things he did and had done to him in Vietnam. Then the left side turns into 1985. He returns to Vietnam. He wants to resolve, you know, his past. Of course, a lot of people there remember and are like, yeah, you killed a lot of our relatives and stuff. Still showing his memories of being a soldier in Vietnam. Then this guy decides to go to Latin America. He goes to Honduras and Nicaragua. He wants to see what's going on down there. And obviously it's not very good. There's lots of Contras just running around massacring villagers. You know, the Contras were the right-wing terrorists in Nicaragua. Yeah, and this more memories of this guy being a young man coming home from Vietnam. And it's just not fun. Everyone's treating him like a pariah. It's really nice to have Alan Moore and Steve Bissette collaboration. Yeah, this comic kind of disappeared. It had all these big names. I don't think it sold well, I have a feeling. Even though there is part 2, it must have sold okay. But I guess they just did it as like a pro bono thing. Eclipse Comics was just like, I think the 2 editors were pretty liberal. And they wanted to get this information out. Next story is False Note, Nancy's story, as told to Joyce Brabner. Joyce Brabner, she did a lot of like political benefit comics in the 80s. And she realized that comic books are pretty good at conveying information, so they could be used for charity type things. Art and lettering by Rebecca Huntington. Not familiar with her. She's got chops, I guess. She draws well. Kind of boring. I think it's the coloring is really obnoxious in this story. But in the next issue, we'll see Rebecca Huntington does some spot illustrations that are really refined and like well done. So I think maybe she was an illustrator. But, you know, a lot of great illustrators, comics is new to them. So, you know, they got to readjust. So this is just about a young woman who, she's kind of sickened, actually, by the way hippies back then would, like, attack the soldiers coming home. She'd kind of defend them. It's like they were drafted. They didn't start the war. So she actually joins the army. Puts her money where her mouth is. And once again, the recruiters kind of misrepresent her military tour. They're like, oh, you're into music. You could be in the band there. And for a little while, they let her do it. She's just practicing music. Playing in the officers' clubs. But then, of course, they're like, hey, we need more MPs. No more music for you. You're just going to have to be an MP, which is, you know, military police. She also has to spend some time in airborne, which she's not ready for, or was told she would have to do. But she talks about being an MP in the army and lots of rapes. A lot of the female soldiers are treated like shit. There weren't many female soldiers back then, remember. It's a different time. A very small minority of soldiers were women, and they were harassed and apparently brutalized and raped. And nobody would believe them. There was no punishment. Other women soldiers talking about their harassment. And through all this Nancy, our protagonist, she became, not so gung-ho about the military and starts speaking out against the injustices in it. A little map by Leonard Rifus, longtime political underground cartoonist. Very odd map. It's like abstract. Lots of little facts. Here we have Alternate Service, a short saga brought to you by Steve Leialoha. And this is just an auto-bio comic. Steve Leialoha was a young man, in the early 70s, and he decided, instead of going to jail or joining up or splitting the country, he became a conscientious objector. A lot of people back then, or maybe even now, well, there's no draft, but they didn't realize they could do that. I guess they had to respect, certain religious beliefs like Quakers, or just people who were dead set against killing. They were pacifists. So he joined the California Ecology Corps. So basically he spent his term of service fighting fires, doing all kinds of work in the parks, the California parks. And he said it was tough as hell. I mean, they worked you, but you didn't have to go kill anybody or get shot at. So very interesting. Luckily, he knew about this. He had a good counselor who told him, hey, you can do this. Just check the box that says CO. And there's Steve Leialoha currently. Basically telling young people, hey, you got a choice. You don't have to go into the military, even if you're drafted. So then we have another Steve Leialoha drawn story, this time written by Denny O'Neil. But it's basically Denny O'Neil just transcribing Andy Mager's story. It's called The Decision, Andy Mager's story. Once again, we see this young kid who grows up, true blue American. But when he gets to college age, he's starting to question war and the military after seeing a speech by this conscientious objector guy talking about the horrible things he had to do in Nam. And so this our Andy actually goes to jail for it. He refuses to sign up for the draft. And of course, the penalty for that is going to jail. But he's standing by his convictions. Even the news reporters, they interview him. He's not going to back down. So he serves his time. The judge doesn't care what moral reasons he has for not fighting. It's against the law. And he sentences him to jail. Serves his time, comes out, and he's not going to quit. He's going to basically be fighting for peace for the rest of his life. This one's A Long Time Ago and Today. Script by Joyce Brabner and Luann Merkel. And art by Thomas Eates and inked by Mark Johnson. Thomas Eates always does a nice job. I'm not a huge fan of his work, but sometimes he can really draw the shit out of a page. And this is talking about Latin America. At the time, of course, Reagan was president, and there was a lot of shenanigans going down in Nicaragua and El Salvador. It's amazing that Reagan wasn't impeached for that stuff. Really illegal stuff he was pulling behind Congress's back. So they're talking to an El Salvadoran, and he's telling them like the history of his country, how a while back, when the fascists took over, there was no more voting. It didn't matter that they voted for the other guy. The military just said, we don't care. Our guy's in power. And of course, people demonstrated. They're yelling out, we know who we voted for, write the truth. And the military's way to deal with these protesters was to open fire on them. Hundreds and thousands of people were killed by the military. The narrator, our protagonist, he gets a job working for the legal aid office, which is very dangerous because basically he's going to be a witness, take photos of all these massacres, lots of beheadings. I guess the El Salvadoran military was trying to, terrorize the villagers and the people who wanted democracy. So they became more and more brutal, like literally chopping people's heads off with machetes, like pretty medieval shit. So of course his name's on a list. The military want his ass. Anyone who does stuff like that, brings attention to their crimes. And he's always one step ahead of them. He just never sleeps in the same place. And one day he comes out of a friend's house and the military spots him. And he escapes though. He runs through the jungle, makes it across the border, makes it to America. So I'm glad for him. Here we see one of those children's drawings, like on the cover. This is like an actual replication of this little kid in Honduras, I believe. Oh no, this is El Salvador. And then we learn a little bit about the whole history of El Salvador, about how the conquistadors came, exploited the native people there. Then all through the 1800s and 1900s, there was horrible fascist leaders who would just kill their own people by the thousands. And it was all kind of a lot of it was for American corporations. Apparently, most of Latin America at the time, it was like 10% of the people owned 70% of the land and stuff. So it was just a small bit of rich people savagely holding on to what they had. And everyone else just was starving. So they would just protest for like food and stuff. And for their troubles, they would get shot at by the military. The military was basically just the goons for the handful of rich families in these countries. And a little bit more about the El Salvadoran military. And that's the end. Oh, except for this. We have a nice back cover drawn by Paul Mavrides, one of the Academy's favorite underground cartoonists. It's written by Joey Cavalieri, who's like a total DC editor guy. I mean, he wrote for DC too. But as far as I know, I never, a total mainstream guy, And this is just like a board game about getting drafted. Like you'll also win a trip to a military base. And they'll give you free medical checkups and your analysis. Of course, you'll get a spiffy new cocky wardrobe. So nice Paul Mavrides cartooning. Next, number 2, Real War Stories. This one's like $4.95. The first one was $2 because it's got like cardstock covers. Really nice slick paper. It's a pretty nice comic. But even then, $4.95, that was expensive as hell. I mean, I'm sorry, I meant to say, back then, $4.95 was very expensive. I think most comics they charge that now. This one's more about Citizen Soldier, a group that fights for the civil rights of people in the military. Nice cover by Paul Galassi. I had no idea this was Paul Galassi somehow until this week. I always thought it was a Howard Chaykin cover. I assumed it was Howard Chaykin, and it's not. Really nice art, nice colors on that. A little introduction about Citizen Soldier. And look at this, right off the bat. Body washing. And Bill Sienkiewicz art. So we're talking, Bill Sienkiewicz in his prime. Well, I always say that. He's never left his prime, Bill Sienkiewicz, but this is some beautiful painted multimedia art, what you really want from Bill Sienkiewicz, The story is by Jim Narekas. And this one is more about, it's about just the dangers soldiers face being in the military, even when there's no war. They've got all of these commanding officers who, some of them are just sadistic and they just don't care that, some of their soldiers might die in basic training. And it happens all the time. There's hazing things in the military that are allowed to go on where people get killed. There's just flat out, training that's so brutal that, they die. The soldiers die. I just want to say, there's crazy, beautiful colors everywhere. And this nice abstract art of these sharks and fishes. I love this kind of Sienkiewicz stuff. Also, they talk about how apparently when soldiers, sometimes they're like where they shouldn't be. A soldier might die in Honduras. It's an undercover mission. Even his family can't know. And then they'll just be like, oh, he died in basic training. And the family is left scratching their heads like, what? He was stationed in Virginia. How the hell did he end up there? And how did he really die, They don't really tell the families. Oh, this is sweet stuff. Love this, the painted art with the pen work over it. This story is horrifying. I guess this commanding officer, they were doing a basic training in the Mojave Desert, or some kind of training. And everyone had a buddy, because they didn't want, it's for safety reasons. But for some reason, this one soldier, he sent out alone into the Mojave Desert. And he's a good soldier, so he says, sure thing, sir. And his buddy was all like, why are you doing this, Sergeant? He could die out there. He's just like, shut up. So they don't even look for him. He doesn't come back. They don't look for him for 2 days. The sergeant basically didn't want to admit he made a mistake. And he basically said, oh, he's got AWOL. It's like, no. What happened is he died in the fucking Mojave Desert for no reason. He died. They found him. They would have found him in time if they just started looking for him immediately. But he just said he's AWOL. Let's go back to base. Forget about it. And finally they convinced the sergeant and others to go look for him, and they found him dead. And he made it way farther than they thought. So if they started looking for him earlier, he would have made it. He would have been alive today. Talking about all the various equipment in the military, helicopters, trucks that have serious flaws in their design. So every year, hundreds of soldiers die just because they don't want to buy new helicopters, or they bought a faulty helicopter in the first place. That would piss me off so much if I was in the military. Not only do you have to go fight in some shitty war, but even before you get there, if you die just from some turd's negligence or cruelty, that would just be too much. And beautiful art. Everything in this is so nice. Definitely worth the price of admission, as they say. So in conclusion, a lot of the stories will talk about this. Laws have been put into place where you're not allowed to sue the military. No matter how negligent, even if they basically kill you, or kill someone in your family, you're not allowed to sue. So basically, commanding officers can do whatever the fuck they want. And there's no penalty. No matter how many soldiers die under their watch, So a lot of citizen soldier, a lot of their work is basically like, yeah, guys are in the military, we get it. It's not like being a civilian, but they gotta have some civil rights. You can't expect these guys to fight and die for their country, and then but deny them the rights that they're fighting for, This is about the National Guard. A lot of these have introduction pages, and like I said, these drawings are all by Rebecca Huntington, and she's got chops. These are some nice drawings. Here we have a story, it's adapted from the words of Smedley Butler. It's adapted by Joyce Brabner, art by Wayne Van Zandt. In the 80s, Wayne Van Zandt was like one of the few guys who liked military comics. He had a bunch of black and white military comics. He started drawing the Nam, actually, after Mike Golden left. But he was like the one guy. Army comics were pretty much dead. But he kept it alive, him and guys like Don Lomax and Doug Murray. So Smedley Butler was a guy in the early part of the 20th century. He was a Marine who served in more tours of duty of Latin America than anyone. He was just down there his whole military career. And as an older man, he realized he was a total dupe. And that's why it's called War is a Racket. He realized that all that military service he did, it was all for big international banking concerns, huge corporations in America. America would just send the army down to pacify, mostly Central America, because like people were saying, hey, you're exploiting us. We're sick of it. And so the U.S. military would go down there and kick some ass and basically be like, shut up and suck it up. This huge corporation wants to keep raping your country. Deal with it. So he's just talking about all of his tours of duty. I helped make Mexico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. We supervised elections in Haiti, and whenever we supervised them, our candidates always won. I helped in the raping of a dozen Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street. So this guy got wise. Because all those wars, there's no reason we should be down there except to protect really powerful business interests. And that's what we did. And this guy knows it. And then we start talking about Citizen Soldier. Also talking about how the veterans were really dicked over, like after World War I. It was just expected that, if you're a veteran, you're going to get free hospital care, you're going to get this, that, whatever. Of course, that was not the case. Soldiers had a protest in Washington, D.C. That's also just insane. Someone who's going to, go join your army and go die for you. And you won't even take care of them when they get back. So this next story is, I think this one's just called Citizen Soldier. Written by Kim Yale. Before she died, she was married to John Ostrander. They were partners in writing. They wrote many issues of DC Comics like Suicide Squad and stuff like that. I've never seen Kim Yale write by herself. I'm sure she did. I just never saw that. Artist Dean Motter of Mr. X fame, graphic designer turned cartoonist, and he never quite learned how to be a cartoonist. His stuff is usually wretched, and this story will show you why. So this is we start talking about the underground newspapers. Every military base had their own underground paper, which was, not smiled upon by the brass. But, they had the right to do it. A lot of guys got kicked out of the army for doing these things. Dishonorably discharged, disciplined, but they wanted the soldiers to have the truth because the military wasn't giving it to them. And then we start talking about Citizen Soldier. Gays in the military was a big thing at the time. Actually, this is before it was a big thing. And, but it was a thing. That Citizen Soldier helped a lot of gay soldiers deal with the persecution they were experiencing. That's a nice panel, though. Just this loose painting, it really works. But this is just, because Dean Motter usually colored his own stuff. He was an all-around graphic design type guy. This is just some, sorry, it just makes me want to puke. Okay, it's not that bad, but kind of annoying. Once again, reiterating how the military recruits people, gets them in with false promises. A lot of these stories do kind of repeat themselves and talk about the same stuff. Here we have a little prose piece, Homophobia in Uniform, talking more about how bad it was. This is way before the whole Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and then before it became legal. Here next story we have Pool of Tears by Greg Baisden. I know that name sounds familiar. I think he might have written for DC or been like an assistant editor or something. But the art is by Stephen DiStefano. of, I guess, his main claim to fame is Amazing Man, but he later on became this amazing alternative cartoonist. This is some nice stuff. Really reminds me of like Kyle Baker. I think they were buddies. And this is, you've seen this before, this is using Alice in Wonderland to point out how absurd something is. So, of course, they're taking on the military. And the main thing this one's taking on is the discretionary function, which is, we've already talked about, how there's laws that you can't, basically the army is not liable, the military is not liable for anything they do to the soldiers. The guys who were in atomic bomb tests, they were ordered to, sit in a trench 4,000 yards from the first nuclear bombs. Almost all those guys, as you can imagine, got horrible cancers. And some of them applied to the VA for help. And they were like, you can't prove your cancer's from military. It's like, you put me in front of an atom bomb. I think that could be a pretty big reason why I have cancer. So various anecdotes about how veterans are often denied help from the VA, from the hospitals, because they're like, yeah, you have to prove it. Yeah, so soldiers, no matter what they do to you, you could never sue and get justice. Really like this cartooning. I love how sickly he makes the rabbit here. He looks like he's dead, basically. He's an animated corpse. Because he represents the soldiers who were poisoned by Agent Orange, things like that. If you're my age, you might remember that was a big news story at the time. Lots of soldiers were suing about Agent Orange because it was killing. It was making birth defects in their children. It was, the military wouldn't fess up or own up to it, even though it's obvious it's just poison. And at the end, Alice is, after hearing all this horrible information, she's like, I must wake up. This all sounds crazy. It's a horrible dream. And then you hear this voice, Alice, wake up. You're in a dream. Please, please wake up. And it's Lady Liberty. And Alice is asleep on her foot for some reason. I don't know why she fell asleep there. That's some good stuff, at least art-wise. We have another little prose piece, more Rebecca Huntington art, Jar Wars, military urine testing for drugs. Talking about, the civil rights issue, if they have the right to even do that. This one's called The Home Treatment, script by Joyce Brabner, art by Dennis Francis. Not familiar with Dennis Francis. Not very good. But, it's perfunctory. It's telling the story, I guess, so I'll try not to be a dick about it. And this is just about racism in the military throughout history. How even black soldiers who fought bravely for America, they were still treated like shit when they got home. Within the military, they were treated like shit. They were basically given all these grunt-like, dangerous jobs when they were in the military. They weren't actually allowed to see combat, which I don't know. I gotta say, I'd prefer that myself. I'd rather do all this grunt work. And, but throughout America's history, many black soldiers wanted to fight in wars, Even though they were treated so badly in America, World War II, a lot of blacks signed up. They wanted to fight Hitler. And they were just given, kitchen work. They couldn't really, fight. A lot of that is due to racism, because they were constantly afraid you give guns to black people, they're going to rise up. Especially, before slavery was abolished. Just shameful. I just can't imagine how these guys could fight for a country that hated them. Yep, just lots of stories, anecdotal stories of the treatment of blacks in the military. Another prose piece about racism and sexism in the service. We have this last story is My Father and His Son by Mike W. Barr and Mark Badger, also friends with Stephen DiStefano. And Mark Badger has many different styles. This is this kind of more abstract painted style. And it's just about a kid who grew up without his dad. His dad died in the military before he was even born. And he basically died just from some stupid accident in the military. It wasn't during combat. So it's kind of a bittersweet story. Just this guy thinking about how he never knew his dad because the military was irresponsible. And then there's a lesson at the end. We find out that other soldiers, luckily, have stood up for themselves. And when they were told to do something incredibly dangerous, they actually were tried. But with the help of groups like Citizen Soldier, they fought it and won. They won an honorable discharge. Because, I mean, sometimes the military is like, oh, clean up that shit. It's like, this is carcinogenic. I'll get cancer in 5 years if I do this shit. And they're like, we don't care. But you can fight it with the help of groups like Citizen Soldier. And has a hopeful ending. We get a nice Paul Mavrides back cover. This time he's doing everything. What's wrong with this picture? This crazy shit happening. This tank is shooting a giant flaming carrot, which might be a shout out to Bob Burden. Pterodactyl. But really, when you get down here, it's just talking about all the horrible things the military's done to its own soldiers. Kind of reiterating a lot of the things we've seen before. Faulty helicopters that crash and kill soldiers. Nuclear testing that gives them radiation poisoning. This is nice. This should be a poster. I like this as a two-headed donkey on top of this tin roof. But that's not one of the things that's wrong with the picture. These things are more wrong. These things that actually happen. Really nice piece. So there you have it, guys. Real War Stories, number 1 and number 2, 1987, 1991. I don't know. I imagine these are in dollar bins somewhere. I think they're all gone, though. But, I mean, yeah, it's the subject matter isn't that fun and thrilling. But, man, just the lineup in here, as the Flying Pig would say, what a lineup. I mean, Alan Moore, Bill Sienkiewicz, Brian Bolland. Crazy nice stuff. So hunt these down. Hope you find them. And who knows, you might learn a thing or two about the real world, about the military and being a conscientious objector or something. You might learn about helicopters. I don't know. But hope you enjoyed it. And I hope to see you next time here at the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.